So in this video I wanted to do a third quarter catch up for my DIY literature degree, which I started this year in January. So I'm a bit late to the game because we're in November now, but I just wanted to talk about the development of a DIY literature degree. If you're doing any sort of self-study path, what is the cumulative effect of self-study? How can things change? I want to give you some ideas that I've discovered for how things can change and how that self-study path can develop. Show you the books I've read as well. Like I've said before, it can be a messy process doing self-study at home with no set criteria, no set course, no set tutor, and without that pre-knowledge that a tutor would bring to selecting books and themes for you to study. It can be messy. Literature is a huge landscape. It can be overwhelming at times, but I think there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what I'm finding developing in the third quarter. So without any further waffling, let me get to the books that I read. So I've got a few key areas of study which I planned for year one. The biggest area has been to understand the landscape of Victorian literature. I've had two key authors within that period, Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy. I'm attempting to read all of the works of both of those authors, also to read all of the works of the Bronte sisters as well. So in the third quarter for Charles Dickens reading, I read Hard Times and I also read The Old Curiosity Shop. For Thomas Hardy, which I'm reading in publication order, I read Under the Greenwood Tree in the third quarter, followed by A Pair of Blue Eyes, and followed by Far from the Madding Crowd. I also read for the Bronte sisters Shirley, which is a bit of a chunker. I was not expecting that to be quite so dense. I read for the first time some of the works of Charlotte Perkins Gilman and found out about her and her activism and what an interesting character she is. So I focused mostly in the third quarter on reading The Yellow Wallpaper, and what a ride that is. So you can see there has been some progress exploring the landscape of Victorian literature. My next key area of study was to study Gothic literature. It was very broad at the start of my planning for this DIY literature degree. I soon realised that very broad topics, like to just read the Gothic, can be a bit overwhelming when you're also trying to just read a Victorian era. There's a lot of reading there. So to help me with this module, I decided to shrink this module a little bit and focus in. So that is a really handy tip, which I found, now I'm in the third quarter, I found that has really worked. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, and say you do have a huge area of study like a time era and that's taking a lot of your time, then do feel free to condense some other modules down and to focus in. So with my Gothic module, I instead of saying, right, let's just discover everything about Gothic literature, I honed it in to early Gothic, and I honed in again to the writing of Anne Radcliffe. In the third quarter, I added another 2 Anne Radcliffe books to books read. I read A Sicilian Romance and I read The Romance of the Forest. This is hands down my favourite so far. I absolutely adored The Romance of the Forest. So another Gothic read, I read Iris Murdoch's The Sea, which was a winner of the Booker Prize. Again, this offered up not only the Gothic, but it offered up that idea of exploring an edge, a coastline, a setting that's on land. It is almost in the sea as well. The setting of this story and this mysterious seaside house is what holds the intrigue of the story, but it's also that liminal space. And I took it into more contemporary fiction as well. I read Joanna Harris's Coastliners, and the same with another Man Booker Prize winner, which I read in the third quarter as well, Jan Martel's The Life of Pi, which I loved again, you've got the liminal of a waiting space being stuck on this life raft. Really interesting, I found, doing this liminal reading, but linking it back to what I'm learning about the Gothic. So kind of in the third quarter, my Gothic studies did expand the mental map in my mind of what it could mean, and I've also put into the mix there some liminal studies as well. Also, with my Gothic study in the third quarter, I'm also asking questions still about what is horror, what is Gothic, where does the boundary of those two aspects of genre match or overlap, or where are they different. That did lead me to read Woman Eating by Claire Coda, which is a contemporary, really interesting take on a vampire novel. That I found that really interesting. And I read 2 witch books as well, a witch poetry book by Rebecca Tamas and Witch Child by Celia Rees. So although not necessarily Gothic, they boundary on Gothic as well, and they're helping me answer that question of, like, can it just be spooky or have a witch in it or a vampire in it and still be Gothic? It's just an exploration around that question of actually what is the Gothic novel. So there's loads of tangents there, you can see, for my third quarter reading around the Gothic. I think it is still holding on to the question of what is the Gothic, and how do different elements affect the Gothic. But of course there is still that focus down on the works of Ann Radcliffe, which is such a great ride. And a third module that I really wanted to do in this first year was to study fairy tales. Just like with the Gothic, fairy tales is a very vast and huge subject. It has so many rabbit holes that you can fall down, which sounds very fairy tale, doesn't it? And I very quickly, again, with fairy tale study, realised that it was a bit overwhelming. So I decided this year just to focus on Little Red Riding Hood, its history, the questions around Little Red Riding Hood, retellings as well. In this third quarter, all I got to was Nikita Gill's Fierce Fairy Tales, which is poetry retellings of different fairy tales. You do get in this book some poetry retellings of Little Red Riding Hood, focusing on basically the relationship with the wolf. I also added in this classic, Jane Austen's Emma, so I absolutely loved this. In this third quarter I read Pericles. Although this isn't Gothic, it did have some real Gothic elements in it. You've got shipwrecks, you've got storms, you've got coastlines, you've got that liminal again, you've got trapped women, you've got forgotten women, you've got inconvenient women in here, and you have alchemy, strange sort of witchcrafty procedures, you've got corpses coming back to life. There were moments in this that I thought, what the hell am I reading? You've got incest as well, which is part of the Gothic, sort of really odd sexualized relationships that make you cringe. That's in here. So although I don't think this is classed as Gothic, from reading the Gothic, I was spotting it everywhere in this. And I loved the fact that Shakespeare still has the ability to shock a modern reader. I was actually shocked reading Pericles. It was quite a trip. Along with Pericles, I am also reading Shakespeare's Wife, which is a Germaine Greer book. This is absolutely fantastic. It covers the vilification of Anne Hathaway by male Shakespearean scholars over time, and basically what Germaine Greer does is she just puts cold hard facts onto everything, and especially onto the comments of some of the Shakespearean historians through time who have loved to vilify Anne Hathaway as the woman that trapped and tricked Shakespeare. So you can see where I've got to with my reading by the end of this third quarter. But I think the most interesting impact for me of getting to this point in year one is to see that cumulative effect of the study. And what I mean by that is you kind of get out of the fog and the muddle of the start of beginning this journey, because I think the beginning is tricky because the world of literature is so vast, it can be so overwhelming, and when you don't know what's in the books, how on earth are you supposed to plan what to study? If I was at university, I would have a tutor in front of me who's already planned out a course, they've laid out a course syllabus, they've told me what books to buy, they would have told me what sections were really important, and they would have told me what themes we were covering. So a tutor who has already got that knowledge, already has the map built in their head of the path they want to take their students, already knows the books and has read the books, is planning your study. You don't have that when you're doing self-study, and if you don't know what you don't know, how can you plan what path you want to walk down? It was so tricky at the very start of my study. I found that the hardest part, and I think when you're facing that, the trick is just to start. The way that I pushed myself just to start was to just pick a time period. I think that's the easiest way to do it. I just said, okay, Victorian literature, let's just start reading and see what happens. Or to pick a genre or style like the gothic, I just want to read the gothic, and I did just start reading the gothic and then honed it down to early gothic. So I've said this before, when you first start studying, the path that you step onto is really wide, and you just got to step on and have faith. And then as you read, the path becomes smaller and offshoots start to form. And I think it's your inner tutor forming in your head. I thought of it by the time I got to this third quarter that it feels like there's like a little person, a little inner monologue, a little inner tutor inside my head whispering things like, oh, that was an interesting theme. Where have you seen that before? That book links to this book, and you begin to join the dots. You begin to see the themes that you're reading, or the themes that are jumping out at you that hold interest, and you begin to match it up to other books. And it is always the whispering of that internal inner tutor that you bring to life just by reading and just seeing what happens. So let me give you an example of that. Let's go back to my Ann Radcliffe reading. Throughout the Ann Radcliffe novels that I've read, you've got like women who are hidden away or who are kidnapped. You've got the imprisoned woman. In my mind, the phrase kept jumping into my head, the inconvenient woman. There's a woman here who is inconvenient in the mix. The inconvenient woman, and I found that was really useful to do as these themes begin to jump out at you, to give them a key phrase or a key title like the inconvenient woman. It's easier then to hold that in your head as a searchlight when you're reading other books. Is there an inconvenient woman in this book somewhere? I read The Hand of Ethelberta last month, and there's inconvenient women in this as ex-wives who are hidden away inside forests. There are inconvenient family members as well. I thought back to the classic Jane Eyre. Absolutely a classic for an inconvenient woman locked away. And it's made me really start to think of that theme as something I'd like to explore and to connect the dots and to compare the books, which is what I've started doing. Like planning moving forward, I'm asking questions like, well, what makes a woman inconvenient? And what happens if the woman pushes back against being thought of as inconvenient? What if a woman chooses to be inconvenient on purpose? What are the consequences? There are lots of questions that are being generated just around that theme of inconvenient women that just jumped out at me. I've looked at future reading to come, so some of those key authors, do any of these books look like they might be able to be read looking for that theme. I mean, Dombey and Son, the idea of inheritance and inconvenience, I saw that in The Hand of Ethelberta. I think it's going to reappear in Dombey and Son again. Also, I picked up this book, The Mad Woman's Ball, about women who are locked away in an asylum by their husbands, inconvenient women locked away. So you can see what started off as purely a time period of reading or a genre of reading is now becoming that thematic syllabus, a thematic module. I am interested in finding out about the inconvenient woman. I can start bringing different time eras of books now, and I'm planning forward more thematically. But you only get those themes jumping out at you by the reading and by letting that inner tutor begin to form. Listen to those little sparks of, oh, but that's a common theme. I read that in that book before. Listen to those, write them down, keep a list of things that jump out at you. That is your inner tutor forming. And also write down those keywords or key phrases that hold your curiosity, key phrases that hold those ponderings about themes. Write down those key phrases. They will become searchlights moving forward, or torches in the dark to seek out the next book to read. So key phrases, listen to Whisperings of the Inner Tutor, find those themes. And that voice of the inner tutor guiding you in your head also comes in the form of questions. So questions are such a fantastic, useful element of self-study, I found. So in that third quarter reading, I read The Old Curiosity Shop. If you've read The Old Curiosity Shop, you will know that the character of Quilp in this book is unbelievable. It's like no character I've ever read before. Sadistic, abusive, malevolent villain that is Quilp is just quite astonishing to read, set against the beautiful goodness of little Nell. Then thought, well, what's Quilp's motivation, and how does Quilp stand up against other Charles Dickens villains? So I started to get a list of questions about Charles Dickens villains in his writing, and then you start to put that lens on your reading. Then if you've got some questions written down, the next Charles Dickens book that you pick up, you approach it with those kind of questions. So what about the villains? Where is the villain? So in Hard Times, not only have you got the school system and the education system itself in the wrong hands, being the villain, trying to squash imagination, but you've also got the character of Bounderby, who is very egotistical and pompous and absolutely linked with the industrial revolution of the time, and how industry was squashing the natural old-fashioned order of the world. So you can see greed and money and status chasing in Quilp, and then the industrialization of the world and social chasing in Hard Times. And then you begin to piece together actually some bigger themes for Dickens that the villains represent. Like Dickens is making a mockery really of the pompous people who think they know it all and are moving with the times. Dickens really loves to mock the facade of social class, the moral consequences of social class and the effect on the poor. Good versus evil morality in Charles Dickens' work. He had a really strong social commentary, not only about social class and industrialisation and the effects of industrialisation on the poor, but he also loved to speak about transformations. I mean, you see it in books like David Copperfield. You see it there. It's a journey of transformation via the moral high ground really, and really understanding what's good, not being swept away by greed and money and wealth and social status, but by transforming a life really by goodness and knowing and holding on to what's morally correct. So by questioning villains in Dickens' work and listening to questions that arise and thinking, oh wow, what about Dickens' other villains? It opened for me a whole rabbit hole then of, oh, through the villains he's showing this. That could lead to a number of essay writing about Charles Dickens' villains and what they represent. You've got a whole theme there, and moving forward I've got that lens to read through, and then I can look backwards as well on the books that I read previously with that lens on. So Bleak House, just like in Hard Times the education system could sometimes be the villain, in this you've got the legal system, so all those systems of power and how power can be misused, with the case of jaundice and jaundice taking so long and throwing people into poverty as solicitors get rich. We've also got the villainous character of Lady Dedlock in here, who is really keeping secrets to hold on to social status, even though that's really immoral, but she's doing it for greed and social status and for her ego. So again, you've got that issue and theme of good versus evil. Questions just like what are Charles Dickens villains all about can open up huge thematic areas to study and links to connect the dots through the novels. So as you read, listen for the questions that are forming. Collect your questions. Your questions are literally drawing new paths for your study. It's just so interesting to follow your curiosity, which basically is what you're doing when you're following those questions. And do make sure that if your curiosity asks a question, follow it. Find the answer. Keep reading till you find the answer. Look back on old books till you find the answer. Read the next book with that question in the back of your mind. Find the answers. In that way, your curiosity and your list of questions also begin to form that tutor in your head. So far that tutor in your head is forming by looking at themes that jump out, collecting themes, collecting questions, generating keywords and phrases to look for. You can see now how your inner tutor begins to develop. I think at the start of my year one, I was just thinking about reading the books. Like I said, you don't know what the path is, you don't know what's in the books, you've just got to start reading the books. Once that inner dialogue with your internal tutor starts to grow, you can then look to those themes and pushing the study then into secondary sources. Now at this point, I am capable of letting my inner tutor voice go, okay, well this we're going to find out where women get their power taken off them. So I'm going to look moving forward at women and marriage in the Victorian era. A lot of these key sources of the novels feature women who in some way or other get their power taken off them through the courting system, through the marriage system, through engagement. I tracked down this book, Good Girls Make Good Wives. That brings into play that idea of the angel of the house. What was the expectation on women, and is it still relevant today? Part of me suspects it might still be relevant today, which is another question that I flagged. That's going to bring contemporary fiction into play. Are women still inconvenient? Are women still expected to be the angel of the house? Is this a problem that is just limited to the Victorian era, or is this now? I mean, how did women kick back? We've seen it in some of the novels, but what about Victorian feminists? What about in real life in the Victorian times? And what were the consequences as well in real life? I mean, what constitutes a new woman in Victorian studies? So women who cut against the mould. So in charity shops, if I've seen any books like this, I pounce on them. So we've got Oh My America. Wheeler celebrates the spirit of 6 Victorian women who crossed the Atlantic to reinvent themselves. What did women have to do to grab their own power back? Britannia's daughters, women of the British Empire, like important women who made decisions. How were they different? How did they break that angel of the house mold? Even picked up in a charity shop Victorian murderesses. I thought, well, you can't get more breaking the mold than this, like women just deciding to go their own way. Did they do it for power, or did they do it out of frustration? I thought that would be an interesting read, all on the same theme. But as these themes are coming out and I'm putting different questions on as lenses to read through, I'm beginning to see the practical application of reading through the lens of literary theory. And because I love this aspect of women and women's studies, I've decided moving forward just to focus on feminist literary theory. So I picked up some books on this. I'm not going to try and get my head around everything all at the same time. I just want to understand what reading literature through a feminist theory lens would look like. And I think also asking yourself the question, what did I find easy and what did I find difficult, is important to ask yourself at least every quarter in your studies. Like I said, I'm still finding Shakespearean reading difficult, so I can ask that question. It's definitely still Shakespeare. I can bring in some secondary sources for that now that I know that that's harder, and that's what I've done. So I have recently bought the Essential Shakespeare Handbook. I think this looks fantastic. Not only does it colour code all the different types of plays, so you've got the histories, the romances, the comedies, the tragedies, so I can see what each play subset it belongs to, but for every single play I will show you what it does. It gives you a context of behind the play. It gives you a list of all the key characters that are easy to see. It takes every single act of the play and it breaks it down in modern language as to what you're about to read. For every single act, it gives you tips on reading the play. It gives you information on seeing the play and how it was shown on stage. So, and it does that for every single play. I think that's going to help so much. So ask the question of what are you finding difficult and get secondary resources to support that. I'm also going to lean more into Shakespeare next year because I'm finding it difficult. I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm making it more of a focus. I've also started being a bit more choosy about the editions that I'm buying in Shakespeare because I am finding it tricky. I've started looking for Arden Shakespeare editions because they have a lot of context, a lot of notes at the front. They also have the translation under the original language directly on the page as well, which some of my editions I found just waiting till I see what comes up in charity shops, they don't have those. So editions and secondary resources for support where you need it is also something that starts to develop in the third quarter, I found. The last thing I want to talk about that has developed in the third quarter is stylistic comparisons that can really support your study. I found this out simply by accident. So by pairing authors, I found out when I started reading a Dickens every month with a Thomas Hardy every month, the difference in the way these two authors write characters is so vast. Thomas Hardy is a very realist characters. They're very human, they're very well rounded. You can kind of feel the realness of Thomas Hardy's characters. Charles Dickens writes characters in a different way. He takes characters to extremes. They almost become like caricatures. Incredibly effective as well. Both authors incredibly effective at character writing in very different ways. And I think putting these two together, it has really helped me to isolate what makes Thomas Hardy Hardy and what makes Charles Dickens Charles Dickens. It's helped me to understand the writing because they're so different. And I found it again really strongly, again I have to say completely by accident, by pairing Jane Austen and Anne Radcliffe from the same time period, roughly the Romantic Regency time period. But Jane Austen focuses on the minutiae of the everyday, of subtle glances, of subtle gestures, of the subtle innuendo of societal life in the times, whereas Anne Radcliffe is broad and sweeping and melodramatic, and you've got women being kidnapped and ridden away into castles and locked up. There is nothing about the everyday in Anne Radcliffe's writing. Incredibly different styles, both incredibly effective. Understanding this style really put a spotlight on Jane Austen's style and vice versa, because they're so different. So reading buddies, two authors are either very similar or very different. I'm going to be looking moving forward to do that as well. So stylistic themes where authors are different and pairing authors up. So this month on my TBR, I'm planning to do this again. I'm going to read Northanger Abbey, a gothic Jane Austen, alongside The Mysteries of Udolpho. I'm going to put Jane Austen and an Anne Radcliffe together again because I loved it so much. There's another really interesting way of growing your internal tutor in your head by letting sort of stylistic comparisons speak and teach you. So I think that's everything for the third quarter I want to speak about. That development of themes, development of questions, development of keywords and phrases, development of stylistic buddy reads, a development of your secondary resources as you begin to develop your themes more that you're interested in. All of those things I think are the cumulative effect of study that I found really useful. It feels like the fog of those early days of year one is beginning to clear a little bit as my internal tutor buddy begins to speak to me in my own head. Moving forward, I do want to plan to do more DIY literature degree videos, but if there's anything in particular you're interested in, please do shout it out in the comment section, and if I haven't got any answers yet, I will think on it as I carry on studying. So guys, keep following your curiosity, keep building your self-study map in your head, and watch that inner tutor grow, and have fun most of all. Okay, thanks guys for watching and listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.